everyone. I'm Jose Leal, the Science Director and Curator with the National Shell Museum and Aquarium on Sanibel Island, and I'm here today standing in for our Executive Director, Sam Ankerson, who couldn't be present. And today I have the pleasure of introducing John Fallon, who comes to us from the Audubon Nature Institute in New Orleans, where he has been for almost 8 years, their Director of Sustainability and Coastal Conservation. Among the many, many achievements in his career, John received his master's degree in environmental management from the prestigious Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. And today he'll be presenting a thought-provoking talk about the sustainability of Gulf seafood. I want to remind you that this is a webinar format, not just a simple Zoom meeting. So questions will have to be entered in the chat. For those of you who don't know, the chat will be in the horizontal menu bar at the very bottom of your screen. So feel free to ask questions. We will have a selected amount of time at the end for John to answer questions from the audience. So John, if you're available now, let's get rolling. And thank you so much for being with us today, John.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the introduction. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I said, I'm John Fallon. I'm with Audubon Nature Institute here in New Orleans, and we're going to talk a little bit about the work I do with sustainable seafood and the Gulf, and I'll try to tie it a little bit back to our friends here in Florida who are hosting me. So just a little bit about who I am and the program I represent. Audubon Gulf stands for Gulf United for Lasting Fisheries. We are the sustainable seafood program out of Audubon Nature Institute here in New Orleans, primarily Audubon Aquarium. We founded this program in 2012 because we looked around and realized there wasn't a lot of local work being led by an aquarium like ourselves in the region, working with sustainable fisheries and seafood. And that's a big thing that a lot of aquariums do. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we got into it, but it felt like an important thing for us to work on in developing new conservation programs. And so when we say Gulf United for Lasting Fisheries, we really mean Gulf. Our program has operated from Brownsville to the Keys on projects. And so we do things across all 5 Gulf states, state, federal fisheries, working with all sectors of the industry, and some of our work sometimes even takes us up in other parts of the country, but we are primarily focused on the Gulf. And the reason we're primarily focused on the Gulf is because there's plenty of work to do down here. So this is 2022 commercial landings data, so commercial fisheries, and I should clarify, I work on commercial fishing for the most part. So there's commercial and recreational. We work with the commercial side, so what really professionals go out and harvest and bring back to market. And the Gulf, if you can look at these numbers, we are the 2nd largest commercial fishery in the United States. And we harvest close to $1 billion worth of seafood, and usually about 1.5 billion pounds of seafood. So 2nd largest, number 1 is Alaska. So grading on a curve, we like to think we're number 1 because Alaska is one of the top 3 in the world globally. So it's big business, big economic business, but usually that means that there's other factors involved in it too, right? So there's the cultural aspect, the economic aspect, the environmental aspect. So working on fisheries is a major part of our community. It's a major part of our conservation strategy. It's a major part of our culture, especially here in New Orleans, where we are a food and tourism culture. People come here to eat our food. A lot of that food is seafood. And I know seafood's a huge part of, dining in Florida as well. So major industry, a lot of work can be done on it, and it's a major driver for us. So that's one of the reasons we work on it. And how we do that is a bunch of different ways. Well, we started off really working focused on industry engagement. So working with all aspects of the supply chain. So fishermen on the water to the docks, processors, fish houses, um, working our way through retail sectors. And so we do a lot of different things depending on the need of the fishing industry and community. But the crux of it is that we work with them to demonstrate they are sustainable, to help improve their sustainability when needed, and then really also advocate for them and educate them about things that are happening within the market and with seafood. Fishermen love to do one thing, it is fish. But there's a lot of other things that go into fisheries management, and we'll talk about that. And so we like to see our job to help make sure that they're up to speed on things. They're not missing out on a process that heavily impacts them, but also, give them the credit where the credit is due, and show that they do a lot of really good work to be sustainable and limit their impacts on the environment. On the other side of this is community engagement. So I work for an aquarium. Engaging guests and the public is what we do. We are education focused. And so that's the other part of our work. We do the work and then we go talk about it and teach people about the importance of sustainability, the importance of seafood to our region. So we do things like create consumer-based guides to help people make decisions on seafood. We engage with guests at our facilities here in New Orleans. We host events. We do dinner series with local chefs, attend festivals, and we have a local restaurant and chef program where we do training with chefs and restaurants. So we try to touch all aspects of the chain and connect everybody together, because it really is a very interconnected world in the seafood industry. I mentioned our restaurant partnership program. We started this in 2014. And that is, at the time, and really still to this day, a lot of people eat seafood in restaurants. They're a major purchaser of seafood. They have a lot of influence and power. Chefs are still very much seen as kind of celebrities, and in a town like New Orleans, local celebrities especially. And so it allows us to work with chefs to help improve their buying practices, educate them about the seafood and fisheries in the industry, and then also work together to kind of elevate the conversation, so to speak, and get it to more people. And they help us do that through demos and events and interviews and things like that. So that's a little background more on who we are and what we do. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the basics of sustainability, and get a little bit more into the meat of it and talk about fisheries more specifically, and really how sustainability translates into the marketplace. So defining sustainability, there's a lot of different definitions of sustainability. So this is really how we get to our definition of it. And so when we think about sustainability, it's often, what are we doing to make sure that a resource is there for generations to come? I think it's a pretty solid understanding most people have. We also want to make sure that we're looking at it equally weighted. And I mentioned this earlier, is there's the economic component of sustainability, there's the social or cultural aspect, and there's the environmental. And I think we always gravitate towards environmental. That's obviously where we build from, right? It's as a resource, we're taking care of the environment. That's our biggest concern. But at the same time, because it is fisheries and there are people out there making a living off it and whole communities that depend on it, like, we have to take that into account when we're talking about this. And so how does that translate into sustainable fisheries? It's management that is designed to take care of that resource for generations to come. We want to minimize impacts on the environment and non-target species, but also the species that we're trying to harvest, right? Take out the stuff we want to take out, not take too much of it out, not harm anything that's around those fisheries. And then also make sure that fishermen have the ability to make a living. I often tell people there are no fisheries without fishermen. They have to be part of the conversation at the table. It's something we really pride ourselves on in our program. And then to package it all up into a nice, neat definition, sustainable seafood is seafood caught or farmed by responsibly managed fisheries using environmentally friendly practices to maintain healthy ecosystems and resilient fish populations. So we're taking care of the environment, we're taking care of the people that harvest, and we're making sure that all that goes into that is around for the next generation to be able to do it. When it comes to really fisheries here in the Gulf in the US, it's important to know that we have really good fisheries management in the US. And that is what really defines something as sustainable, is how good is your science behind it, especially at the state and federal level. Um, and the US has been a leader in fisheries management really since the mid 90s, and has done a lot to increase the science behind it, um, and really rebuild fisheries. Before then, fisheries, there's some examples of being a bit of a free for all. And we had collapses. I think, cod up in New England is a classic example of a fishery that was there one day and gone the next because we probably weren't managing it properly. And so the US really devised systems that have helped manage and maintain our fisheries and even help improve them over time. And so we always tell people, if you're confused about what to buy, buying US domestic is always going to be a very solid choice because we know that we have the science and management behind it. And so a little bit more on that is, there are 10 national standards of sustainability. This is a science-based process. It is a dynamic process. Fisheries are fishermen bring their catch in, they report it. We're able to monitor a lot of that in real time to make decisions on when to open or close fisheries. So it is very much a scientific driven process, with economic considerations. But really what we're looking at with fisheries management in the US is, again, considering social and economic outcomes for fishing communities, preventing overfishing, not taking on too much, rebuilding depleted stocks, minimizing bycatch and interactions with protected species, so the things we don't want to catch, and then identify and conserve essential fish habitat. So making sure that we aren't harming the places where these fish reproduce, for example, or need to go to live so that they escape some fishing pressure, things like that. Because so what kind of goes into that is all this science. So it is state and federal management agencies working together. There are state managed fisheries, there are federal. There are fisheries that are managed both by state and federal. Fish don't know borders, right? Collaborative groups, again, tracking landings, stock assessments. That's how we kind of try to measure to the best of our abilities the health of the populations out there. Gear testing, new types of gear that can be less harmful on the environment or harmful to the fish we're trying to catch. And enforcement is a big part of it. So having people go out and make sure that people are following the rules and catch the bad actors. And kind of how this boils down into the kind of management side of things is kind of these terms when we look at stock and population status, and that's the driving factor, is maintaining those healthy populations. So we have healthy stocks out there. Those are stocks that under the current fishing rules are able to maintain a population size, operate something called maximum sustainable yield. So that's the max we take out, and then that population is able to maintain and sustain itself for continued use. But then there's overfishing, which is, you're over harvesting too quickly. It can cause populations to drop or potential for it. So that's something to watch out for. Overfished is when a population is too low. And so that actually could prevent us from reaching maximum sustainable yield. The difference between overfishing and overfished is overfished could be a population that we have stopped overfishing on, and it's taking time to rebuild. And overfishing could be happening on a healthy stock that could lead to it being overfished if we don't do something about it. And then rebuilt stocks are exactly what they sound like. These are stocks where we've put in fishery management measures, and they've been rebuilt, and they're able to be used to their maximum. And we're able to get those into market. So and these are the terms that we're using at like the federal level. So to kind of put it out here, the federal government usually annually puts out updates on stocks and what is kind of overfished, overfishing in all their territories. And you can see down here in the Gulf that compared to some other parts of the country, we do a really good job with our fisheries management. Um, there are some species like greater amberjack. It's both overfished and overfishing. Some things in the snapper grouper complex, relevant, especially for Florida, it's where a lot of our snapper and grouper fishing comes from, can kind of go back and forth. But a lot of these fisheries are in plans to be rebuilt, which is why we're still able to harvest them, is because we're not taking out too much. We're trying to let people fish and make a living while still maintaining that. So that is really kind of the science side of how we do fisheries management and sustainability. Um, the other part is what is sustainable seafood in the market? And when I say the market, I mean where we go buy seafood. Um, and it's a little bit different. Well, we feel strongly that U.S. fisheries are well managed. There's an entire system out there that requires third-party verification of sustainability to sell seafood. And this is a movement that really started kind of in the mid to late 90s when we still didn't have great fisheries management up and running. And so it was hard to know and trust where your seafood is coming from. And this is obviously international as well. This isn't just the US. And so back in the mid 90s and early 2000s, partnership between World Wildlife Fund and Unilever actually started working on rebuilding or building up a third-party certification for seafood. And that has evolved into lots of different certifications that have what we call eco labels. We'll look at those in a minute. And really, it went from this maybe extra thing to kind of the industry standard over the last pushing 30 years now. When I started working on this, it was like, sustainability is a fad, it's going away, all these things. And now pretty much every major company that purchases just about anything, but especially seafood, has sustainability policies that you have to meet in order to sell your product. And that's really how we got involved in working with the fishing industry, is helping them show they are sustainable and improve it so they could sell their product. So this is just an example of some of the major companies that buy seafood and have those policies, but there are plenty more. And so these sustainability standards are heavily tied to the management and the science we already talked about. So they're looking at sustainable target stocks, the impacts on habitat, other species, and ecosystem, making sure that the science behind the fisheries management is sound. And they're looking at the life history of the species, the gear type, all the management behind it. And again, U.S. management is usually not a problem in these type of sustainability certifications, but it is essentially just it's a verification that the management practices are sound and that the fish harvest is sustainable. And so, these certifications kind of started off, and it became kind of evident that not everybody was going to pass the certification right away. There's a lot of work towards it. So they developed these other systems called fishery improvement projects and now aquaculture improvement projects. And these are stakeholder-led kind of projects that are just what they sound like. It is, how do you work together to improve your fishery so you can get a certification? And so we did that type of work with Gulf Shrimp. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But that's one of the systems in place to help show market sustainability. You can sell your product if you're in a fishery improvement project. Obviously, certified sustainable, we've already mentioned this a little bit, but this is a full assessment of a fishery by a third party, and you get a stamp of approval. It is traceable, called chain of custody, so that you can show that the seafood you say you are selling is sustainable from that certified place. The main one that everybody kind of knows about is Marine Stewardship Council, or MSC. It's that bluefish check mark. It's the one that was developed kind of originally with WWF and Unilever. There's another one now called Certified Seafood Collaborative. That's the second largest, and these are both for wild capture. So not aquaculture, but the stuff we're catching out of the wild. And because there's lots of different certifications, collectively, people decided that they needed a way to cut through the noise. And so for you, if you're buying seafood and you're wondering, well, how do I know which certification is good? This is why they created something called the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative. So this is the who watches the watchman. This is the watchman of the watchman. So this is a group that then benchmarks certifications to make sure that the certifications are actually basically worth it. And so if you were wondering, I don't know which label on a package is good or bad, we recommend anything that has been benchmarked by GSSI. And so you can see some of those on here, MSC, that blue check mark, some of the aquaculture ones as well. So I like case studies to kind of bring it all back and give it a real world perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Gulf shrimp industry, which is where I've spent most of my career working on sustainability. So as a commercial fishery, this is the one that I think we think of the most here in the Gulf. It's probably our most iconic one. And we're really talking about white and brown shrimp primarily, especially over here in Louisiana into Texas. Pink shrimp, obviously, in Florida, especially on west coast of Florida, huge pink shrimp fishery. But this is, again, this is managed by states and federal groups working together to manage this fishery. And for the most part, it's those three species and then royal reds primarily coming out of Alabama. So shrimp, I think, is really that iconic Gulf species. And how we manage shrimp is through a comprehensive fishery management plan. You have to have your permits and licenses to operate and fish out there. There's electronic logbooks and reporting and observer coverage to make sure what's happening on the water is being reported properly. They close areas to fishing so that shrimp have the ability to reproduce and get bigger in size, better market value. They have bycatch reduction devices. I think historically, the shrimp fishery had a lot of interactions with sea turtles, especially. But since the early 90s, they've been using what's called TEDs or turtle excluder devices, which is what you see in this photo. And it's a big grate that goes into your shrimp net. And if something is small enough to pass through, like shrimp, it goes into your bag. And then larger things hit the grate, and then they're able to swim out an opening in the net. So reducing bycatch. And so that's just a great example of how fishing industry has innovated and created things and implemented them that have led to species recovery with sea turtles. And then gear restrictions to make sure that you're not harming too much bottom, especially if you're in an area where there could be corals, for example. And so what we did over really a decade, and this was a project that actually started before our group is even in existence, but the shrimp industry, because of kind of those historical negative perceptions, had a lot of work to do to prove they were sustainable. And in July of 2024, they achieved a sustainability certification through Certified Seafood Collaborative. And so all the white, brown, pink shrimp in all 5 Gulf states and federal waters on all the different types of gear that they use to harvest shrimp are certified as sustainable. And so there's a lot that went into that, but this was the culmination of a huge amount of work. It was 15 years total, a bunch of different groups, including industry-led NGOs like ourselves, state, federal management agencies, work together to achieve this for the industry. So that was one less thing that they had to kind of worry about. And there's a lot that our local fishing industry has to worry about these days. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And this is really the crux of kind of what we're seeing a lot of pressure on the industry. So sustainability was a big pressure point. We help them with that for shrimp. But imports, and this is impacting pretty much every aspect of our seafood supply chain, but shrimp especially, is that there are a lot more foreign shrimp farms that are able to produce a lot of product and put them into our market in the US. And aquaculture and farm raised is not always bad. Imports are not always bad. But from an economic perspective, and you can see here below in the late 80s, imported shrimp was at 500 million pounds. And in 2018, it was at 1.53 billion pounds. And it's difficult for our shrimp industry and our domestic fishing industry to compete with with that amount of product and at the price that that product is produced. And so, the majority of domestic shrimp eaten in the Gulf or eaten in the US comes from the Gulf, but 94% of the shrimp we eat in the US is imported. And not everybody knows that, and it's not always clearly labeled. So that's a big hurdle for our fishing industry to tackle. And that's not just shrimp. That's a lot of different sectors. So I want to talk a little bit about seafood in the environment. So some other things that impact seafood outside of what just kind of the fishing practices itself. And I think I've got 5 things kind of highlighted in here, but we'll kind of start off with climate. And so one thing that we are seeing is we are seeing, due to waters getting warm, is fish are moving. And we're seeing it a lot more in kind of colder areas. So things moving farther north, in the Northeast and the Northwest. There's a great example too, I think even West Coast, actually off of South Africa. You're seeing fish populations that, for example, African penguins like to eat are moving farther away to colder waters. It's making it harder for penguins to even get their food. And so that can have different impacts, but for the most part, fish moving farther away from how we catch them makes it harder to catch them, makes it more dangerous to catch them, makes it more expensive to catch them. And we may also be seeing some impacts from warming waters on size of fish, their weight, sexual reproduction, things like that. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And it's something that a lot of people are studying, especially for finfish, flounder being one of them. That's one where they're really looking at changes in temperature potentially impacting them. Oil spills. I'm in Louisiana. This is a big one for us. These obviously have devastating impacts, and with the Gulf being such an industrial corridor, I would say, for shipping and energy production, that when something goes wrong, it can be very bad. We saw that obviously with the Deepwater Horizon. I was here at that time. It was before we started the Gulf program, but we saw it in other ways. But even just the perception of what can happen can lead to millions of dollars in loss, just in the moment and also over time. A lot of the work done post BP was to prove that the seafood was safe and healthy to eat again. And so while there is no scientific concern, at this point, the perception alone could be devastating. And for an industry with tighter and tighter margins, it could be fatal. The next one could be fatal. Marine debris. We often think about plastics in the environment. And, right now the estimate is 8 million metric tons of plastic currently in the ocean. And this debris it harms a lot of different marine life. It can also harm fish. It can make them feel full when they're not and waste away. There's also concerns, can this accumulate in fish and the fish we eat? And could we be ingesting plastics and microplastics? So marine debris is another major concern. But this is one of those ones where, people can help be a solution, right? We can help keep this stuff out of our environment or use less of it. And then that obviously helps that marine ecosystem immensely. Coastal land loss. This is not just a Louisiana problem, but this is a big Louisiana problem. And the reason why it's not good is because a lot of our coastal areas are where fish and a lot of species we enjoy, that's the nurseries. That's where they grow large. Um, they are safe before they go out in the environment. And so as we lose those nurseries, we could lose fisheries productions. That's really the big importance of wetlands from this area, and also that they also help provide a cleaner environment too. And so that's a big concern, especially with things like, say, oysters. Wetlands can help filter things out before they get to our filter feeders. But just perspective, any coastal place is losing land. Louisiana is losing it rapidly. We're obviously in SEC football country here, so we got to explain everything at football fields. But it's basically about a football field every 100 minutes or so, is what they say now. So. And HABs are harmful algal blooms. This is not something we deal with too much in Louisiana, though this is definitely a concern in Florida and Texas. And so I'm sure you all are familiar with this, but these can be devastating. These HABs create dead zones, they choke the water, you can have mass die-off, toxicity even from shore, impacting people and pets. And so this is another major issue that we as people can hopefully do a lot to help resolve, because it can be devastating on fish populations. And for example, if you have a red tide and it impacts a lot of grouper, then that also impacts the fishery, right? And so we could have less grouper potentially for years to come, as we have to wait for that population to rebuild. So to kind of try to bring it home and make it maybe a little more relevant for Florida and the Shell Museum, I want to talk a little bit about kind of what Florida does with some seafood activities, especially with shellfish. So I talked a little bit about, I primarily work with wild capture, but aquaculture is a huge sector of the fishing industry, and it's growing. And while aquaculture and farm-raised product from overseas can potentially have issues, a lot of US-based aquaculture is great. And a lot of that we see with our shellfish. So primarily in Florida, it's hard clams, increasing oyster production for you all as well. I know Apalachicola has historically been a major oyster producing area, but it's been hit with hard times in recent years. But kind of one of the advantages of aquaculture in this sense is that you're able to reduce pressure on wild populations. It's really minimally impactful on the environment, which is great. That's what you want to see out of aquaculture. You're operating in an ecosystem where these species already are. And really it increases the benefits in a way, because you're adding more filter feeders, so you're getting cleaner water. And that's what these guys do. So by adding more aquacultured shellfish, you're leaving those clams out in the ecosystem. You're adding more in a controlled way that can help improve the ecosystem. And you're able to then harvest that and create resources out of it. I believe it's right now, Florida aquaculture for this on the West Coast is like a $20 million industry. So it's pretty solid and growing, though it can be impacted negatively by, say, a hurricane, but that's unfortunately impacts us all. And then, another kind of example of fishing related to mollusks is the queen conch. So in Florida, you can't harvest these. A lot of that is because they were over harvested in the past. And so when we're not taking care of something, we lose it in many ways. And this is obviously an iconic species. It's incredibly iconic in the Bahamas and the Caribbean as well. And so due to overharvest and habitat loss, the population's on the decline. Another example of aquaculture is there are facilities that are able to reproduce these for commercial use. But I think there's some question about whether the other part of that system is, can they release them and help establish populations, and that part's a little unsure. That is a really good model for conservation. We've seen it work before, where you're able to reproduce something in captivity, keep some of it for harvest, release the rest out to the wild, or you're able to harvest from the wild, bring in, raise up, release some of them at a larger size. But I think this is a great example of the importance of maintaining like healthy wild populations for environment, economy, and culture with a species like this. And when we don't take care of something, it goes away. And it's very difficult to get things back. So we want to be proactive, really, in how we manage species now. And we really have done a better job with it, but there's still a long way to go to catch up for a lot of things. And this is kind of my parting takeaway for everyone is, you go through this and you hear about sustainability, and we don't want to scare anybody off from eating seafood, which can sometimes happen when we really get into the details on things. But our kind of 4 easy tips we tell consumers about how to pick seafood out is: one, choose domestic local seafood. It's always going to be a good choice, in my opinion. If you can't do that and you have the bandwidth, you want to look for those fisheries and seafood products that are certified or improving in those fishery improvement projects. So look for those eco labels. Diversification of your seafood is always good. We mostly eat 5 different types of seafood in the US. It's shrimp, which is primarily imported, tuna, salmon, tilapia, or other kind of whitefish. So eating seasonally, diversifying, buying local is a great way to be sustainable and relieve pressure on some of our more heavily fished operations. And then ask questions. Ask your server where your seafood comes from. Ask your fishmonger where your seafood comes from. Oftentimes with sustainability and conservation, the message is don't do this, don't do that. It's a sacrifice. The one thing I like to say about sustainable seafood is you can be a conservationist by just eating good food. And that by eating good US domestic sustainable seafood, you are reinforcing all that good science. You're reinforcing it for the fishermen who are out there every day. You're putting that money back in your community, and you get a great meal out of it. So, and by doing so, you're protecting the environment. It's a win-win all the way around. And so that's kind of my parting message. And I guess we'll turn it back over for questions.
Well, John, thank you very much for a very well-crafted and informative talk. We do have a few questions indeed. First, from Mark Mittelstadt. Mark asked, when I was a kid 60 years ago, I fished from a party boat off of Tampa, Florida. They complained that the commercial fishers watched on radar for where the party boats were finding good fish. They went to those locations and fished them out. You said you don't work with recreational fishing, but do you know if there are any efforts to leave some places unfished by the commercial players?
Yeah, and so really, especially for finfish, there's what's called IFQ system, or basically fishing quotas. So they're only allowed to catch so much, and the recreational has their own side of it. There are protected areas where you can't fish for certain species. It's really going to depend on the species that you're looking at. But I think fishing has changed a lot, and the amount of participants has decreased. There's not as many commercial fishermen as there used to be, and they've got pretty strict limits and reporting. So I can't always say that they won't compete on the water between commercial and recreational, but the limits on what they catch for fish, and that's really what we look at from fisheries management, right? I can't prevent you guys from trying to catch the same fish, but I can make sure that you don't catch too much fish.
Great. Thank you. From our colleague, Rich Toth. Rich is asking, any examples of fisheries populations that have been successfully rebuilt?
Yeah, I think one of the most iconic fish in the Gulf is the red snapper. And red snapper is a great model of fisheries rebuilding. So that was a fish that was, I think, prime example of overfishing, and through good fisheries management and controls, they've rebuilt that population. The other one I'll bring up as an example is swordfish. Um, Swordfish is one of the first sustainable seafood campaigns. If you remember, it gives swordfish a break. And so they got people to stop eating swordfish. The problem was they rebuilt swordfish and then they forgot to tell everybody. So swordfish is a well-run fishery in the U.S. We usually don't harvest as much quota as we could. And so that's another great example of fisheries management and work.
Great. From Claire Beckman, where are most of the shrimp imported from?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the year, but for the most part, we get a lot from India, Ecuador, Southeast Asia. So that's where a lot of our farm shrimp is coming from these days.
All right. Another question from Kimberly. With the sustainable seafood movement, has your organization considered working with slash targeting Walmart, Aldi's, Sprouts, Whole Foods, which are gaining a larger footprint across the US?
Yeah, so actually, Walmart was one of the first companies to have a sustainable seafood policy and commitment. And so a lot of these groups, these companies, they work with other NGOs. There's some that specialize in working with corporations like that to help guide them on their sourcing policy. So they've done a lot of work. A lot of them have also invested in improving fisheries themselves. So a lot of them have been at the table for a long time and working with people like me in this side of the industry.
Great. Rosabelle is asking two questions. What's your favorite fish restaurant and what's your favorite fish?
Oh man. Gosh, I hope none of the chefs I work with are on here. I think my favorite seafood restaurant in New Orleans is GW Finn's. They do some really interesting stuff and they're very sustainability minded, but also with total utilization. And so I'll give them a plug. Um, Most people eat a fillet of fish and they throw the rest away. Fish are more than fillets, and so they do a great job of using closer to like 50 to 80% of their fish off a whole fish, which is immense. Um, my favorite seafood, um, I guess we're talking about eating. I love to eat shrimp. I've loved shrimp since I was a kid. I always say that I started working in this industry because I just wanted to eat food. And I've gotten roped into all the other stuff. Um, but I love, we've got a coastal fish here. You probably have in Florida too, called a sheep's head.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
they're really, I love a sheep's head. I think they're cool looking, but they're also good eating. I know a lot of people don't eat them outside of this market, but they're quite a good fish if you cook it up right.
We have one question here from one of our Sunnyvale neighbors. She asks, in New England, in the past 2 years, it has been very hard to find Gulf shrimp. She's a snowbird. Any suggestions?
Yeah, Gulf shrimp. I know that depending where you're at, certain people will carry it. You can also order online direct from fishermen down here. So there are some fishermen that will actually package their product up and send it to you, depending on the market. So Whole Foods has carried Gulf shrimp in the past. Some of them have seasonal specials on things like that, but a lot of the problem is right now there's so much imported seafood into the market that it's hard for some of our guys to break through in that same way. But if you have the means, you can buy direct from some Gulf fishermen or companies that'll send it straight to you.
Um, One next to the last question. For recreational fishing, how do I know which species are off limits?
Yeah, so for recreational fishing, all of that should be listed for y'all. That's going to be either FWC, so for Florida, right, your Wildlife Commission, or through the federal government. But FWC should have that in their fishing, uh, their recreational fishing info guide. They should be able to tell you what the fishing is off limits to, what you can't catch, what you can't keep, things like that.
So Claire Beckman, who is the president of our board of trustees for the museum, was the person who asked you about. No, actually, she didn't ask that, but she's mentioning that on Sunnyvale, she used to fishing ship's head, so she's very happy to hear that ship's head is one of your favorite fish. I've actually eaten ship's head fish by Claire, so and it's a tremendously tasty and flavorful fish. I think we are done with the session on questions. I really want to thank John for a very nice program, very nice talk, very informative. I want to give you two reminders to the members of our audience. First is that this lecture will be posted. There is a recording that will be posted within the next few days in our museum website under lectures. And the second message is that our Great Hollow Shelves is totally completed. So we've opened to the public, a soft opening today. So if you're in the area, Sunnyvale, Fort Myers, come see us. I mean, it's really outstanding. And once again, thank you so much, John. And have a great one, everyone.
Thank you all so much. It was great.
Bye-bye. Thank you.